Mother Bear flattened herself under a gurney to protect a baby. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The rain hammered against the windows of Pine Valley Medical Center like angry fists. Nurse Kira Santos pulled her cardigan tighter as she walked down the dimly lit pediatric corridor at 2 a.m. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, casting dancing shadows on the pale green walls. She had been working the night shift for 3 years now, but something felt different tonight. The air was thick with an unusual tension that made her skin crawl. Her rubber shoes squeaked softly against the polished floor as she approached room 204. Inside, baby Oliver Mitchell slept peacefully in his hospital crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The 6-month-old had been admitted earlier that evening with a mild fever, nothing serious, but his worried parents had insisted on staying overnight. They were now curled up uncomfortably in the reclining chair beside his bed, finally getting some rest after hours of anxious watching. Kira paused at the doorway, checking her watch. Time for the routine vitals check. She was about to enter when a strange sound made her freeze. It wasn't the usual hospital noise of beeping machines or distant conversations. This was different. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from outside, but somehow felt too close for comfort. The sound grew louder, accompanied by what sounded like heavy footsteps on wet pavement. Kira's heart began to race as she realized the footsteps weren't human. They were too heavy, too irregular, with an odd shuffling quality that sent chills down her spine. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to listen. Then came the crash. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed through the hospital corridor, followed by the unmistakable screech of a door being forced open. Kira's breath caught in her throat as she heard something large pushing through what sounded like the emergency exit at the end of the hall. The door that was supposed to be locked tight. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call security. But before she could dial, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A deep, guttural breathing that was definitely not human. It was getting closer. Baby Oliver stirred in his crib, letting out a soft whimper that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Kira's maternal instincts kicked in, overriding her fear. She had to protect that baby, no matter what was coming down the hall. She slipped quietly into the room, careful not to wake Oliver's sleeping parents. The baby's eyes opened, bright and curious, completely unaware of any danger. He reached up his tiny hands toward Kira, making soft cooing sounds that tugged at her heart. The breathing sound was right outside the door now. Kira could hear claws clicking against the floor tiles, a sound that made her realize with growing horror that whatever was in their hospital was not supposed to be there. She moved protectively toward Oliver's crib, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. That's when she saw the shadow. A massive shape moved past the doorway, too large to be human. For a moment, Kira thought she might be having a nightmare, that the stress of too many night shifts had finally gotten to her. But the smell that drifted into the room was all too real. Wild, earthy, unmistakably animal. Oliver made another soft sound, and the shadow stopped moving. Kira held her breath as she watched the doorway, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it would wake the sleeping parents. The shadow shifted, seemed to hesitate, then slowly began to move into the room. What appeared in the doorway made Kira's knees nearly give out. A massive brown bear, its fur wet from the rain, stood in the entrance to the pediatric room. The animal was enormous, easily 7 feet tall even on all fours, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But what terrified Kira most was that the bear wasn't alone. A much smaller shape appeared beside the massive adult, a cub that couldn't have been more than a few months old. The baby bear pressed close to its mother's side, its fur also damp and its dark eyes wide with what looked like fear. The mother bear's gaze fixed on Oliver's crib, and Kira felt time slow to a crawl. This was it. This was how it would end. A wild bear in a hospital room with a helpless baby. Every instinct told her to scream, to run, to do something, anything, to get help. Instead, she found herself frozen, watching as the massive animal took a careful step into the room. The bear's movements were deliberate, almost cautious, as if she understood she was in a place where she didn't belong. Oliver, completely oblivious to the danger, let out a delighted giggle that echoed in the tense silence. The sound made both the mother bear and her cub turn their attention fully to the crib. What happened next would haunt Kira's dreams for years to come, but not in the way she expected. The mother bear didn't charge toward the crib as Kira had feared. Instead, she moved with surprising gentleness, her massive paws barely making a sound on the hospital floor. The cub stayed close to her side, occasionally looking up at its mother as if seeking reassurance. The bear's dark eyes never left Oliver's crib, but there was something in her gaze that Kira couldn't quite understand. It wasn't hunger or aggression. It was something else entirely. Oliver continued to gurgle happily, his tiny hands waving in the air as if he was trying to reach for something only he could see. The sound seemed to fascinate the bear cub, who took a tentative step closer to the crib. The mother bear immediately placed herself between her cub and the baby, but her posture wasn't threatening. If anything, she seemed to be protecting both children. Kira's confusion deepened as she watched the scene unfold. The mother bear lowered herself to the ground, her massive body moving with careful precision. She positioned herself directly under the metal gurney that stood beside Oliver's crib, her bulk barely fitting in the narrow space. The sight was so unexpected that Kira had to blink several times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. The bear had flattened herself completely under the gurney, her body forming a protective barrier between the crib and the rest of the room. Her cub immediately understood the signal and pressed close to its mother's side, also taking shelter under the metal frame. From their position, both bears could watch over Oliver while remaining hidden from anyone who might enter the room. It was then that Kira heard the voices in the hallway. "I'm telling you, something's not right," came the gruff voice of Marcus Webb, the night security guard. His heavy footsteps echoed as he approached. That door didn't open by itself. Someone or something forced it. "Maybe it was just the wind," replied Dr. Elena Vasquez, the on-call pediatrician. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been working too many consecutive shifts. "These old buildings have their quirks." "Wind doesn't leave muddy paw prints on the floor, Doc," Marcus shot back, his voice getting closer. "And I've never seen prints that big before." Kira's heart raced as she realized they were heading straight for Oliver's room. She looked at the bears under the gurney, then at the sleeping parents who remained completely unaware of the drama unfolding around them. She had to make a decision, and she had to make it fast. The mother bear seemed to sense the approaching humans. Her ears perked up, and she shifted slightly under the gurney, but she didn't move away from her protective position. The cub pressed even closer to its mother, its small body trembling slightly. "Room 204 is just ahead," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice now clear enough that Kira could make out every word. "I need to check on the Mitchell baby anyway. His fever spiked earlier and I want to make sure he's stable." Kira's mind raced. If Dr. Vasquez and Marcus entered the room, they would immediately see the bears. Marcus would probably panic and call for backup, maybe even try to use his weapon. The thought of violence erupting in this small space with an innocent baby and sleeping parents just feet away, made her stomach turn. But as she watched the mother bear's protective posture, something clicked in her mind. The bear wasn't here to cause harm. She was here for the same reason Kira was, to protect a vulnerable child. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless with its implications. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. "Everything looks normal from here," Dr. Vasquez whispered, peering into the dimly lit room. "The baby's sleeping. Parents are resting. Maybe we should check the other rooms first." "No," Marcus insisted, his hand moving to the flashlight on his belt. "I want to do a thorough sweep of every room. If there's an intruder in this hospital, I need to know about it." He took a step into the room, his large frame filling the doorway. Kira felt paralyzed as she watched him scan the space with his flashlight beam. The light swept across the crib, past the sleeping parents, and was moving toward the gurney when something unexpected happened. Oliver woke up. The baby's sudden cry pierced the silence, causing everyone to freeze. Marcus's flashlight beam stopped moving, focused on the crib. Dr. Vasquez rushed forward, her medical instincts overriding her caution. "What's wrong, little one?" she cooed softly, reaching into the crib to check on Oliver. Her gentle voice seemed to calm the baby, whose cries quickly subsided into soft whimpers. But Oliver's cry had another effect that no one could have predicted. The bear cub, hidden under the gurney, responded to the sound with a soft whine of its own. It was barely audible, more of a breath than a sound, but in the quiet hospital room it might as well have been a shout. Marcus's flashlight beam immediately swung toward the gurney. "What was that?" Dr. Vasquez looked up from Oliver, her brow furrowed. "What was what?" "I heard something, coming from over there." Marcus took another step into the room, his flashlight trained on the space under the gurney. Kira watched in horror as the beam of light crept closer to where the bears were hiding. She could see the mother bear's eyes reflecting the light. Two bright spots in the darkness under the metal frame. In seconds, Marcus would see them too. That's when Oliver's father, Tom Mitchell, stirred in his chair. "What's going on?" Tom asked groggily, his voice thick with sleep. He rubbed his eyes and looked around the room, taking in the scene of the security guard with his flashlight and the doctor hovering over his son's crib. "Just a routine check, Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Vasquez said quickly. "Oliver's fine. You can go back to sleep." But Tom was now fully awake, his paternal instincts kicking in. He stood up from the chair, careful not to wake his wife, Sarah, and moved toward the crib. "Is his fever getting worse? Should we be worried?" The movement in the room seemed to make the bear cub more nervous. It shifted under the gurney, and this time the sound was more noticeable. A soft scratching of claws against the floor tiles. Marcus heard it immediately. His flashlight beam zeroed in on the exact spot where the bears were hiding. There's definitely something under there. Kira felt the world slowing down around her. In a few seconds, Marcus would discover the bears, and everything would spiral out of control. She could already imagine the chaos, screaming, running, weapons being drawn, and in the middle of it all, two innocent babies who had no understanding of the danger they were in. But then, something happened that changed everything. Oliver, still fussing softly in his crib, dropped his favorite stuffed animal. The small brown teddy bear fell through the bars of the crib and landed on the floor with a soft thud, rolling directly toward the gurney where the real bears were hiding. The bear cub, curious and perhaps recognizing something familiar in the toy, reached out with one tiny paw and gently touched the stuffed animal. It was at that exact moment that Marcus's flashlight beam found its target. The light illuminated the scene under the gurney in stark detail. The massive mother bear lay completely flat, her dark fur pressed against the cold hospital floor. Beside her, the small cub held Oliver's teddy bear gently in its paws, looking up at the sudden brightness with wide, frightened eyes. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The world seemed suspended in that impossible moment. Marcus's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. His flashlight trembled in his grip, the beam wavering as his hands shook. Dr. Vasquez, still bent over Oliver's crib, turned to see what had caused the security guard's stunned silence. When she saw the bears, her face went completely white. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tom Mitchell, who had been moving toward his son's crib, stopped mid-step. His eyes followed the flashlight beam to the space under the gurney, and what he saw there defied all logic and reason. His first instinct was to grab his baby and run, but something about the scene made him pause. The mother bear wasn't snarling or showing her teeth. She wasn't preparing to attack. Instead, she lay perfectly still, her intelligent eyes moving between the humans and the baby in the crib. Her massive head was turned slightly, positioning herself so she could see both her own cub and Oliver at the same time. It was a protective stance, but not an aggressive one. The bear cub, still clutching the teddy bear, made a soft chittering sound. It was a baby's sound, vulnerable and scared, and it seemed to break the spell that had frozen everyone in place. "Nobody move," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with tension. His free hand moved slowly toward his radio. "I need to call this in." "Wait," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, her medical training overriding her fear. She had spent years learning to read body language and assess threats, and something about this situation didn't add up. "Look at them, Marcus. Really look." The mother bear's breathing was steady and controlled. Her ears weren't flattened against her head in an aggressive posture. Most telling of all, she had positioned herself between her cub and the humans, but she had also placed herself between the humans and any potential threat from outside the room. It was as if she was protecting everyone in that space. Tom Mitchell, his voice shaking, spoke up. "How long have they been here?" All eyes turned to Kira, who had been silent throughout the entire encounter. She swallowed hard, realizing that her next words could determine what happened to the bears, to Oliver, to everyone in that room. "I don't know," she lied, unwilling to admit she had been watching the scene unfold for several minutes without raising an alarm. "I just got here when you did." But even as she spoke, Kira found herself studying the mother bear's behavior more closely. The animal's positioning wasn't random. She had deliberately chosen a spot where she could monitor both the crib and the doorway. She was guarding Oliver just as fiercely as she was protecting her own cub. Oliver, blissfully unaware of the tension in the room, let out another soft giggle. The sound made the bear cub look up with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. The little animal chittered again, a sound that was remarkably similar to a human baby's babbling. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He had been a security guard for 15 years, and he had never encountered anything like this. His training told him to treat the bears as dangerous intruders, but his eyes were telling him a different story. Dr. Vasquez took a careful step closer to the gurney, her movements slow and deliberate. "I need to understand what's happening here," she said softly. "This behavior isn't normal for wild bears." As if responding to her voice, the mother bear turned her head slightly to look directly at the doctor. Their eyes met, and Dr. Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine. The intelligence she saw in those dark eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. This was a mother making conscious decisions to protect the young in her care. "The storm," Tom Mitchell said suddenly, his voice filled with realization. "The power's been flickering all night. Maybe they got separated in the storm and the cub wandered in here somehow. His words triggered a memory in Dr. Vasquez's mind. Earlier that evening, she had heard the nursing staff talking about unusual animal activity in the area. Several deer had been spotted near the hospital parking lot, and there had been reports of a black bear family seen crossing the main road just a few miles away. The storm had been fierce, with winds strong enough to knock down trees and power lines. The mother came looking for her cub, she whispered, the pieces falling into place. But when she found him here, with Oliver, she didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood. The mother bear had found her cub in a room with a human baby, and instead of taking her cub and leaving, she had stayed to protect both children. The bear cub, still holding the teddy bear, began to make soft mewling sounds. It was clearly tired and perhaps hungry, but it seemed reluctant to leave its position next to its mother. The sound seemed to stir something in Oliver, who responded with his own soft babbling. "They're talking to each other," Tom said in amazement, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Sarah Mitchell, who had been sleeping through the entire encounter, began to stir in her chair. She mumbled something incoherent and shifted position but didn't wake up. Everyone in the room held their breath, afraid that any additional noise might shatter the delicate balance they had achieved. Marcus lowered his flashlight slightly, reducing the harsh glare that had been shining directly on the bears. "What do we do now?" he asked, and for the first time since discovering the bears, his voice held no aggression. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, considering their options. Protocol dictated that she should evacuate the room and call animal control. The bears would be tranquilized and relocated, assuming they weren't considered too dangerous and destroyed instead. The thought made her stomach turn. "There's something else," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the mother bear. "I've been thinking about the recent wildlife reports. There have been several bear sightings in the area over the past month, but they've all been of the same family group. A mother with 2 cubs. The implications of her words hit everyone at the same time. If this mother bear had 2 cubs, and only one was here in the hospital, where was the other one? As if summoned by their thoughts, a new sound echoed through the hospital corridor. It was distant but unmistakable, the cry of a young animal in distress. The mother bear's ears immediately perked up, and she lifted her head slightly, every muscle in her body tensing. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the scrambling of claws on tile floors. The mother bear made a low rumbling sound in her throat, not threatening, but communicative. She was calling to her other cub. "There's another one," Marcus breathed, his hand automatically moving back toward his radio. "Wait," Dr. Vasquez said urgently. "If we panic now, if we bring in more people in chaos, we could make this situation much worse. The mother is already stressed about having one cub in an unfamiliar environment. If her other cub is lost somewhere in the hospital." She didn't need to finish the thought. A panicked mother bear searching for a lost cub could become truly dangerous, especially in the confined spaces of a hospital filled with vulnerable patients. The crying sound grew louder, and now they could hear it was accompanied by human voices. Somewhere else in the hospital, other staff members had discovered the second bear cub. The mother bear began to shift restlessly under the gurney, torn between her protective instincts for the cub beside her and her need to find and protect her other baby. It was then that Oliver reached through the bars of his crib and managed to touch the teddy bear that the bear cub was still holding. His tiny fingers brushed against the soft fur of the toy and inadvertently against the cub's paw. The contact was brief, lasting only a few seconds, but the effect was immediate and profound. The bear cub looked up at Oliver with what could only be described as recognition. The baby gazed down at the small animal with the same innocent curiosity he showed to everything in his world. In that moment, something shifted in the room. The fear that had been holding everyone frozen began to melt away, replaced by something else entirely. It was as if they were all witnessing something sacred, a connection that transcended the boundaries between species. The mother bear, sensing the change in the atmosphere, relaxed slightly. Her breathing became more even, and she settled more comfortably into her protective position. But her ears remained alert, still tracking the sounds of her other cubs somewhere in the hospital corridors. "We need to help her," Dr. Vasquez said suddenly, her voice filled with conviction. "We need to reunite this family before something terrible happens." Tom Mitchell looked at her in surprise. "You want to help the bears?" "Look at her," Dr. Vasquez replied, gesturing toward the mother bear. "She's protecting our children just as much as her own. The least we can do is help her protect hers." But even as she spoke, the sounds from the corridor were getting more chaotic. More voices, running footsteps, and what sounded like furniture being moved. The second cub was clearly causing quite a disturbance somewhere in the hospital, and it was only a matter of time before the situation escalated beyond anyone's control. Marcus looked torn between his duty and his growing sympathy for the bear family. "My job is to protect the people in this hospital," he said slowly. "And what if the best way to protect them is to help this mother find her other cub?" Dr. Vasquez challenged. "What if trying to separate them or force them out creates more danger for everyone?" The debate was interrupted by a new development that changed everything. Sarah Mitchell finally woke up, opened her eyes, and saw a massive brown bear lying just a few feet away from her baby's crib. Her scream echoed through the entire hospital corridor. The piercing sound shattered the delicate calm that had settled over the room. Sarah Mitchell's eyes were wide with terror as she took in the impossible scene before her. A massive brown bear lying just feet away from her baby's crib, with a small cub nestled beside it. Her maternal instincts exploded into pure panic. "Get away from my baby!" she shrieked, jumping up from the chair so quickly that it toppled backward with a loud crash. The sudden noise and movement had an immediate effect on everyone in the room. The mother bear's head snapped up, her protective instincts triggered by the perceived threat. The bear cub dropped the teddy bear and pressed closer to its mother, chittering anxiously. Oliver, startled by his mother's scream, began crying loudly. "Sarah, don't move!" Tom shouted, reaching out to stop his wife from rushing toward the crib. But Sarah was beyond reason, driven by the primal need to protect her child. She lunged toward Oliver's crib, but Dr. Vasquez intercepted her, grabbing her arms and holding her back. "Mrs. Mitchell, please, you need to stay calm." "Calm?" Sarah screamed, struggling against the doctor's grip. "There's a bear next to my baby. How can you tell me to stay calm?" The mother bear, interpreting Sarah's aggressive movements as a threat to both her cub and the human baby she had been protecting, began to rise from her position under the gurney. Her massive frame unfolded slowly, deliberately, and for the first time since the encounter began, she showed signs of potential aggression. Her ears flattened slightly against her head, and a low rumbling sound emanated from deep in her chest. "Everyone freeze," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. He raised his flashlight again, but kept the beam pointed away from the bear's eyes. "Nobody move until I figure out what to do here." But the damage was already done. Sarah's screams had been heard throughout the pediatric ward, and the sound of running footsteps could be heard approaching from multiple directions. Within seconds, the quiet hospital corridor would be filled with staff members, security personnel, and possibly even patients' families who had been awakened by the commotion. "We need to get everyone out of here," Dr. Vasquez said urgently, still holding on to the struggling Sarah. If more people come rushing in here, this situation could become deadly. The mother bear was now fully upright, standing between the humans and her cub. She was enormous, easily weighing over 400 pounds, and her presence filled the small hospital room with an overwhelming sense of raw power. But despite her imposing stance, she hadn't moved toward any of the humans. She was holding her ground, protecting her territory and her young. The bear cub, sensing its mother's tension, began making distressed sounds that were heartbreakingly similar to a human child's whimpering. The sound seemed to cut through Sarah's panic, and for a moment her struggling ceased. "She's scared too," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with sudden realization. "The little one is scared too." But before anyone could respond to this moment of clarity, the first wave of hospital staff arrived at the doorway. Nurse Patricia Reeves appeared first, followed closely by Dr. James Morrison, the chief of pediatrics, who had been in another wing of the hospital when he heard the screaming. "What in the hell?" Dr. Morrison began, but his words died in his throat as he took in the scene before him. The sight that greeted them was beyond anything they could have imagined. A massive brown bear standing in the middle of a pediatric hospital room, with a tiny cub at her feet, while 5 humans watched in tense silence. Baby Oliver's cries added to the surreal atmosphere, his innocent voice the only sound cutting through the heavy tension. "Nobody move," Dr. Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of years of medical training. "Patricia, radio security and tell them to seal off this entire wing. No one else comes near this room." But it was too late for containment. More staff members were arriving by the minute, drawn by Sarah's screams and the unusual radio chatter. Soon there was a crowd of people gathered in the hallway outside room 204, all trying to catch a glimpse of the incredible scene inside. The mother bear, overwhelmed by the increasing number of humans surrounding her territory, began showing more signs of stress. She moved protectively closer to her cub, positioning herself so that she could see all the humans at once. Her breathing became more rapid, and the rumbling sound in her chest grew louder. "She's getting agitated," Dr. Vasquez observed, her voice tight with concern. "Too many people, too much noise. We're pushing her toward a breaking point." It was then that they heard it again, the distant crying of the second bear cub, somewhere else in the hospital. The sound was closer now, and it was accompanied by what sounded like a full-scale emergency response. Footsteps, shouting voices, and the crackle of multiple radios created a cacophony that seemed to be moving in their direction. The mother bear's reaction to her other cub's distress calls was immediate and heartbreaking. She took several steps toward the doorway, torn between staying to protect the cub beside her and going to rescue her other baby. The internal conflict was visible in every line of her massive body. "She needs to get to her other cub," Tom Mitchell said softly, speaking for the first time since his wife's outburst. "Listen to that crying. Something's wrong." Dr. Morrison looked at him incredulously. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand this is an unusual situation, but we cannot allow a wild bear to roam freely through our hospital." "But she's not wild, not really," Tom replied, his voice growing stronger. "Look at her. She's been protecting Oliver this whole time. She could have hurt him, could have hurt any of us, but she hasn't. She's a mother doing what mothers do." Sarah, who had been quiet since her initial panic, looked at her husband with surprise. "Tom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we need to think about this differently," Tom replied, moving slowly toward Oliver's crib. The mother bear watched his movements carefully, but didn't interfere as he gently picked up his son. "Maybe, instead of treating her like a threat, we should be treating her like what she is, a mother trying to protect her children." The baby's crying gradually subsided as Tom held him, but Oliver's wide eyes remained fixed on the bear cub, as if he was fascinated by this unusual new friend. The bear cub, in turn, seemed calmer when Oliver was calm, as if they had formed some kind of emotional connection. Dr. Vasquez watched this interaction with growing amazement. "I've read about interspecies bonding," she said quietly, "but I never thought I'd see it happening in real time." The sound of the second cub's distress calls was getting louder, and now they could make out human voices shouting instructions. "Corner it near the elevator," someone yelled. "Don't let it get to the upper floors." The mother bear's agitation increased dramatically. She began pacing back and forth in the small space, her massive body moving with surprising grace despite her obvious distress. Every few seconds, she would look toward the doorway, then back at her cub, then toward the crib where Oliver had been lying. "We have to do something," Dr. Vasquez said urgently. "She's going to bolt, and when she does, people could get hurt." But what could they do? The logical response would be to evacuate the room and let animal control handle the situation. But that would mean separating the mother from her cub, potentially traumatizing both animals and possibly triggering exactly the kind of aggressive behavior they were trying to avoid. Marcus, who had been silent for several minutes, suddenly spoke up. "What if we help her get to her other cub?" Everyone turned to stare at the security guard. Dr. Morrison looked as if he thought Marcus had lost his mind. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "I said, what if we help her?" Marcus repeated, his voice gaining confidence. "Think about it. She's not attacking anyone because she's not a threat. She's just a mother trying to protect her babies. If we help her reunite with her other cub, maybe we can get them all out of here safely." "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard," Dr. Morrison replied. "You're talking about escorting a 400-pound wild bear through a hospital filled with patients." "I'm talking about helping a mother save her child," Marcus shot back. "Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing in a hospital?" The debate was interrupted by a new development that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Nurse Patricia Reeves, who had been monitoring radio communications, received an update that made her face go pale. "Dr. Morrison," she said, her voice shaking. "I just got word from the team trying to contain the other cub. It's injured." The mother bear, as if she could understand the words, let out a sound that was unlike anything any of them had heard before. It was part roar, part moan, and completely heartbreaking. It was the sound of a mother in anguish, knowing her child was in pain and being unable to reach them. "How badly injured?" Dr. Vasquez asked, her medical instincts overriding everything else. "They're not sure," Patricia replied. "It apparently tried to climb some equipment and fell. It's conscious but not moving much. They're afraid to get too close." The mother bear's distress was now overwhelming. She was no longer pacing but standing perfectly still, every muscle in her body rigid with tension. The sound she was making continued, a low, continuous moan that seemed to fill the entire room with grief. The bear cub at her feet, sensing its mother's emotional state, began making its own distressed sounds. The little animal pressed against its mother's legs, looking up at her with obvious confusion and fear. Oliver, still in his father's arms, began to fuss again, as if he could sense the emotional turmoil in the room. Tom rocked him gently, but the baby's eyes remained fixed on the bear's. "This is breaking my heart," Sarah said softly, tears streaming down her face. "She knows her baby is hurt, and she can't get to it." Dr. Morrison looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues and the Mitchell family. He saw compassion, determination, and a shared understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. But he also saw the enormous liability and potential danger of the situation. "Even if we wanted to help," he said slowly. How would we do it? We can't just walk a bear through the hospital corridors. Why not? Dr. Vasquez asked, surprising everyone with the firmness in her voice. She's proven she's not aggressive. She's been in this room for how long now without hurting anyone? If we clear the corridors, create a safe path. You're all out of your minds, Dr. Morrison replied, but his voice lacked conviction. It was then that Oliver did something that would be talked about for years to come in the halls of Pine Valley Medical Center. The baby, still in his father's arms, reached out his tiny hand toward the bear cub. The little animal, responding to some instinct it didn't understand, stood up on its hind legs and stretched toward the human baby. For a brief moment, their hands, one tiny and pink, the other small and covered in dark fur, touched through the air. The contact lasted only seconds, but the effect was profound. Both babies immediately calmed, and the mother bear's anguished moaning subsided into something softer, more hopeful. "Did you see that?" Tom whispered, his voice filled with awe. Everyone had seen it, and no one could explain it. But in that moment, the decision was made without anyone actually making it. They were going to help this bear family reunite, regardless of the risks or the protocols or the potential consequences. "Patricia," Dr. Morrison said quietly, "radio all departments and clear the corridor between here and wherever the other cub is located. Tell them we're conducting an emergency evacuation drill, and no one is to be in the hallways for the next 30 minutes. "Dr. Morrison," Patricia replied, her eyes wide with surprise, "are you sure about this?" "No," he answered honestly, "but I'm sure about what happens if we don't try. That mother bear's going to leave this room whether we help her or not. The only question is whether people get hurt when she does." The plan was insane, unprecedented, and potentially dangerous. But as they looked at the mother bear, still standing protectively over her cub while mourning for her injured baby, they all knew it was also the right thing to do. The only question now was whether they could pull it off before the situation spiraled completely out of control. Dr. Morrison turned to Patricia with newfound determination. "I need you to contact Dr. Rachel Chen in veterinary consultation. Tell her we have an emergency wildlife situation and need her expertise immediately. Don't explain everything over the radio, just get her here." Patricia nodded and stepped into the hallway to make the call, careful to keep her voice low. The crowd of staff members in the corridor had grown larger, with nurses, orderlies, and even some patients' family members trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening in room 204. Meanwhile, Marcus was studying the mother bear's behavior with the keen eye of someone who had spent years learning to read dangerous situations. "She's smart," he observed quietly. "Look how she's positioning herself. She can see everyone in the room, but she's also keeping track of the sounds from the hallway. She knows exactly where her other cub is." Dr. Vasquez moved slowly toward the window, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. The mother bear watched her carefully but didn't react aggressively. "If we're going to do this," she said, "we need to understand the layout. Patricia, where exactly is the other cub?" Patricia returned from her radio call, her face grim. "Third floor, near the surgical wing. It apparently wandered into a supply closet and got trapped when some equipment fell. The maintenance team is trying to clear a path, but they're afraid to get too close because the cub is making so much noise." Tom Mitchell, still holding Oliver, looked at the mother bear with new understanding. "She came up here looking for her babies. The storm must have scattered them, and she's been searching all night." Sarah, who had been quietly observing the scene since her initial panic, spoke up with a trembling voice. "How long do you think she's been protecting Oliver?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but profoundly meaningful. Kira Santos, who had remained silent throughout most of the encounter, finally found her voice. I think she's been here longer than any of us realized. Everyone turned to look at the nurse, sensing there was more to her statement. Kira took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to reveal would change everything. Earlier tonight, around midnight, I was doing my rounds, she began slowly. I noticed that Oliver seemed unusually calm. He's been fussy with his fever, crying on and off all evening. But suddenly, he was sleeping peacefully. I thought it was strange, but I didn't investigate further. She paused, looking at the mother bear who was listening to every word as if she could understand the human conversation. Then I remembered something else. When I checked on him at 1 o'clock, his blanket had been straightened. Not by the parents, they were both asleep. I assumed another nurse had been in, but when I checked the log, no one had signed in. The implications of Kira's words sent chills through everyone in the room. The mother bear had been watching over Oliver for hours, quietly caring for him while his parents slept, and the hospital staff went about their duties, completely unaware of their unusual guardian. Dr. Morrison ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the extraordinary situation. So she's been protecting a human baby all night, and now we're going to help her rescue her own cub. This is either the most beautiful thing I've ever been part of, or the most insane. Maybe both, Tom Mitchell said softly, looking down at his son who was now gazing with fascination at the bear cub. The radio Patricia was carrying crackled to life with an urgent message. Doctor? Morrison, this is Dr. Chen. I'm in the building. What exactly am I walking into? Patricia looked at Doctor Morrison, who nodded for her to respond. Doctor? Chen, we need you in room 204 of the pediatric wing. And, Doctor, you might want to prepare yourself for something unusual. While they waited for Dr. Chen to arrive, the mother bear had begun showing signs of increasing agitation. The sounds from the 3rd floor had changed. Instead of the distressed crying of her injured cub, there were now human voices shouting instructions, and the sound of equipment being moved. The rescue effort was clearly underway, but the noise and commotion were making the mother bear more anxious by the minute. The bear cub at her feet seemed to sense its mother's growing distress. It began making soft whimpering sounds and pressing closer to her massive legs. The little animal's fear was palpable, and it was affecting everyone in the room. Oliver, as if responding to the cub's distress, began to fuss again. But instead of crying, he made soft cooing sounds that seemed almost like he was trying to comfort the frightened bear cub. The interaction was so remarkable that even Dr. Morrison found himself staring in amazement. They're communicating, Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Somehow, they're actually communicating. Dr. Rachel Chen arrived at that moment, a small woman in her 50s with graying hair and the confident demeanor of someone who had spent her career working with animals. She took one look at the scene in room 204 and stopped dead in her tracks. I've seen a lot of things in 25 years of veterinary medicine, she said slowly, but I have never seen anything like this. Dr. Morrison quickly brought her up to speed on the situation, explaining about the injured cub on the 3rd floor and their unprecedented plan to help reunite the bear family. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, her experienced eyes never leaving the mother bear. She's exhibiting classic protective maternal behavior, Dr. Chen observed when Dr. Morrison finished his explanation. But what's unusual is that she's extended that protection to include a human infant. This suggests an extraordinary level of intelligence and emotional complexity. The mother bear, as if aware that she was being discussed, turned her attention to Dr. Chen. The two females, one human, one bear, regarded each other with what appeared to be mutual respect. If we're going to attempt this escort, Dr. Chen continued, we need to understand that we're dealing with an animal who is under extreme stress. She's separated from one of her cubs. That cub is injured, and she's in a completely foreign environment surrounded by potential threats. One wrong move, one sudden noise, and maternal instinct could override everything else. Marcus nodded grimly. So, what do you recommend? We move slowly, we stay calm, and we let her lead, Dr. Chen replied. She knows where her cub is. Our job is to clear the path and make sure she feels safe enough to make the journey. It was then that they heard footsteps in the corridor. Not the hurried steps of medical staff, but the measured pace of someone in authority. Hospital Administrator Helen Foster appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of professional concern, mixed with barely concealed panic. "Dr. Morrison," she said in a voice that carried years of administrative authority, "I need to speak with you immediately, in private." Dr. Morrison looked at the bears, then at his colleagues, then back at Miss Foster. "Helen, now really isn't the best time for administrative discussions. Doctor, I have the State Wildlife Department on the phone. The local police are asking questions, and there are news crews setting up in our parking lot. This situation has gone far beyond medical care. We need to discuss liability, insurance, and the potential legal ramifications of what you're proposing to do." The mention of outside authorities seemed to galvanize everyone in the room. They had been so focused on the immediate crisis that they hadn't considered the broader implications of their actions. "How did the media find out so quickly?" Dr. Vasquez asked. Ms. Foster's expression grew even more grim. "Social media. Someone in the hospital took a photo and posted it online. Within 30 minutes, it had been shared thousands of times. We're dealing with a viral news story now, not just a medical emergency." The mother bear seemed to sense the increased tension in the room. She moved restlessly, her eyes darting between the humans as their voices rose with stress and concern. The bear cub whimpered and pressed even closer to its mother. Tom Mitchell, still holding Oliver, stepped forward. "Miss Foster, with all due respect, I don't care about liability or insurance or media attention. This bear has been protecting my son all night. The least we can do is help her save her own child." Sarah nodded in agreement, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "If you're worried about legal issues, we'll sign whatever waivers you need, but we're not abandoning this mother when she needs our help." Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing the family dynamics, spoke up. "Ms. Foster, I understand your concerns, but we're past the point of conventional solutions. That mother bear is going to leave this room whether we help her or not. The question is whether we facilitate a controlled, careful reunion with her cub, or whether we force her into a desperate, potentially dangerous attempt to reach her baby on her own." Miss Foster looked around the room at the determined faces of the medical staff and the Mitchell family. She was a practical woman who had spent her career managing crises, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this situation. "The Wildlife Department wants to tranquilize both bears and relocate them immediately," she said finally. "No," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "Absolutely not. Tranquilizing the mother while she's this stressed could be dangerous for her, and it won't help the injured cub. We're doing this our way." Miss Foster stared at him in disbelief. "Doctor, you're talking about defying state authorities and risking the safety of everyone in this hospital." "I'm talking about doing what's right," Dr. Morrison replied. "Sometimes, Helen, doing what's right means taking risks." The argument was interrupted by a new development that forced an immediate decision. The radio crackled with an urgent message from the team on the third floor. "Dr. Morrison, the cub's condition is deteriorating. It's becoming less responsive, and we think it might be going into shock. If you're going to attempt some kind of reunion, it needs to happen now." The mother bear's reaction to the news was immediate and heartbreaking. Even though she couldn't understand the words, she seemed to sense the urgency in the human voices. She began pacing again, her massive body moving with increasing agitation. The bear cub at her feet picked up on its mother's distress and began crying in earnest, not the soft whimpering of before, but the desperate wailing of a frightened baby animal. The sound was so heart-wrenching that several people in the room found themselves fighting back tears. Oliver, responding to the cub's cries, began making his own distressed sounds. The two babies, one human, one bear, seemed to be feeding off each other's emotional states, creating a chorus of infant distress that filled the room. "We have to move now," Dr. Chen said urgently. "The stress is affecting both animals and delay is only making things worse." Dr. Morrison looked at Miss Foster one last time. "Helen, I'm going to do this with or without official approval. These animals need our help, and I won't let bureaucracy and fear prevent us from doing the right thing." Miss Foster stared at him for a long moment, then sighed deeply. "Against my better judgment and everything I know about hospital administration, I'm going to clear the corridors. But doctor, if this goes wrong, if anyone gets hurt, the consequences will be on your head." "I understand, doctor," Morrison replied. "But if we don't try, and that cub dies while its mother is trapped here, helpless to save it, that will be on all our heads." Patricia's radio came alive again with another urgent message. "All units, we have a problem on the 3rd floor. The injured cub has managed to crawl deeper into the supply closet, and now we can't reach it at all. We need the mother bear here now, or we're going to lose this little one." The time for debate had run out. The mother bear seemed to understand that her baby was in critical danger. She moved toward the doorway with new determination, her protective instincts overriding her caution about the unfamiliar environment. "This is it, Doctor," Morrison announced. "We're committed now. Patricia, radio all departments and implement a full corridor clearance. Marcus, I need you to scout ahead and make sure our path is clear. Dr. Chen, you'll stay close to the mother bear and monitor her behavior. If she shows any signs of aggression or panic, we abort immediately." Dr. Vasquez looked at the Mitchell family. "Tom, Sarah, you and Oliver should stay here where it's safe." But Tom shook his head. "Oliver has been part of this from the beginning. If that little bear cub helped calm our son, maybe our son can help calm the bear family during this rescue." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded in agreement. "We're all in this together now." As the group prepared to leave room 204, the mother bear paused at the threshold. She looked back at the space where she had spent hours protecting Oliver, then at the human baby in his father's arms. For a moment, it seemed as if she was acknowledging what had passed between them, a connection that transcended species and would never be forgotten. The bear cub, sensing that they were finally going to search for its sibling, pressed close to its mother's side. Oliver, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, reached out his tiny hand toward the bears one more time. And then, in the most unprecedented rescue mission in hospital history, the strange procession began to move down the corridor. A mother bear, her cub, 2 doctors, a nurse, a security guard, a veterinarian, and a family with their infant son, all united in the desperate hope of saving an injured baby bear's life. Behind them, Miss Foster watched with a mixture of terror and pride, knowing that whatever happened next, she was witnessing something that would be remembered long after all of them were gone. The corridor had been cleared as promised, but the emptiness felt eerie and unnatural. Emergency lighting cast long shadows on the walls, and the usual sounds of a busy hospital, beeping machines, quiet conversations, footsteps on linoleum, had been replaced by an almost supernatural silence. The only sounds were the soft padding of the mother bear's massive paws and the occasional whimper from her cub. Dr. Morrison led the procession, his medical bag in one hand and his radio in the other. Behind him, the mother bear moved with surprising grace, her head constantly turning to monitor her surroundings. The bear cub stayed pressed against her side, occasionally looking back at Oliver as if to make sure the human baby was still following them. Marcus brought up the rear, his hand resting on his radio but no longer on his weapon. He had made a conscious decision to trust in this unprecedented situation, but his training kept him alert for any signs of danger. "How far to the third floor?" Dr. Vasquez asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "2 more corridors, then the elevator or the stairs," Patricia replied, consulting the hospital map on her tablet. "The question is whether we can get her into an elevator." The mother bear, as if hearing their conversation, paused at the intersection of 2 corridors. She lifted her massive head, sniffing the air with obvious concentration. Suddenly, her entire demeanor changed. Her ears perked up, and she let out a low rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the hospital walls. "She can smell her cub," Dr. Chen observed with amazement. "Even from this distance, even with all the hospital odors, she knows exactly where her baby is." The bear cub responded to its mother's call with excited chittering, and for the first time since the rescue began, there was hope in the little animal's voice. Oliver, still in his father's arms, made responsive cooing sounds, as if he too could sense that they were getting closer to their goal. But as they approached the elevator bank, a new problem became apparent. The mother bear stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the metal doors with obvious suspicion. The bear cub pressed closer to its mother, sensing her uncertainty. "She's never seen an elevator before," Dr. Chen said softly. "To her, it probably looks like a trap." Dr. Morrison pressed the elevator call button, and when the doors opened with their mechanical swoosh, the mother bear took several steps backward. The strange sounds and movements of the elevator clearly terrified her, triggering every wild instinct to flee from the unknown. "We'll have to take the stairs," Marcus said, but Dr. Chen shook her head. 3 flights of stairs with an agitated mother bear and her cub? That's more dangerous than the elevator. If she panics on the stairwell, we could have a real disaster. Tom Mitchell, who had been quietly observing the bear's behavior, had an idea. What if Oliver helps her understand? Everyone turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "She trusts Oliver," Tom explained, moving slowly toward the elevator. "She's been protecting him all night. If he shows her it's safe." It was a risky plan, but they were running out of options. Tom stepped into the elevator, holding Oliver where the mother bear could see him clearly. The baby, delighted by the new experience, giggled and reached out his hands toward the bears. The mother bear watched intently as Tom demonstrated that the elevator was safe. She could see the human baby inside the strange metal box, unharmed and happy. After several tense minutes, she took a tentative step forward. Dr. Chen moved slowly to position herself beside the mother bear, speaking in a calm, soothing voice. "It's okay, Mama. Your baby needs you. This will get us to your cub faster." Whether it was Dr. Chen's gentle voice, Oliver's presence, or simply maternal desperation, the mother bear made her decision. She stepped into the elevator, her massive frame filling most of the available space. The bear cub followed immediately, pressing against its mother's legs. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was one of the most surreal experiences any of them had ever had. 9 individuals, 8 humans and 1 bear family, sharing a small enclosed space, united in their mission to save an injured animal. The only sounds were the mechanical humming of the elevator and Oliver's soft babbling, which seemed to keep both bear cubs calm. When the doors opened on the third floor, they were greeted by a scene of organized chaos. Hospital maintenance staff had created a clear pathway to the supply closet where the injured cub was trapped, but the area was filled with equipment, tools, and anxious personnel waiting at a safe distance. The moment the mother bear emerged from the elevator, everything changed. She could smell her injured baby much more strongly now, and the sounds of distress coming from the supply closet were clearly audible. Her maternal instincts took over completely, and she began moving toward the sound with single-minded determination. "Everyone stay back," Dr. Morrison called out to the waiting staff. "Let her lead." But as they approached the supply closet, they encountered their biggest obstacle yet. The doorway was partially blocked by a fallen medical equipment cart, and the opening was too narrow for the mother bear to pass through. Inside the closet, they could hear the injured cub making weak crying sounds that tore at everyone's hearts. The mother bear tried to push through the narrow opening, but her massive shoulders wouldn't fit. She became increasingly agitated, making distressed sounds as she realized she couldn't reach her baby. The bear cub at her side began crying in response to its mother's obvious anguish. "We need to move that equipment," Marcus said, but Dr. Chen grabbed his arm. "If we make any sudden movements or loud noises now, she could panic. We're dealing with a mother who can see and hear her injured baby, but can't reach it. That's one of the most dangerous situations in the animal kingdom." It was then that something extraordinary happened. Oliver, still in his father's arms, began making soft cooing sounds directed at the mother bear. The massive animal turned to look at the human baby, and for a moment their eyes met in what could only be described as communication. Tom, understanding somehow what needed to happen, moved closer to the blocked doorway. "She can't fit, but Oliver and I might be able to help." "Absolutely not," Sarah said immediately. "I'm not letting you take our baby into a confined space with an injured wild animal." "Sarah, look at her," Tom replied gently. "She's not going to hurt Oliver. She's been protecting him all night, and right now we might be the only ones who can help her save her cub." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. "I'll go with them. As a medical professional, I can assess the injured cub's condition and provide immediate care if needed." The debate was cut short by a new development that changed everything. From inside the supply closet came a sound that made everyone's blood run cold. The injured cub had stopped crying. The sudden silence was more terrifying than any amount of noise. "It's going unconscious," Dr. Chen said urgently. "We're running out of time." The mother bear's reaction to her baby's silence was immediate and heartbreaking. She began making desperate sounds, trying even harder to force her way through the narrow opening. When that failed, she began pacing frantically, her massive body radiating distress and helplessness. That's when Oliver did something that no one could have predicted. The baby reached out toward the supply closet and made a soft sound. Not crying, not babbling, but something that seemed almost like a call. From inside the closet, weak but audible, came an answering sound from the injured cub. "They're calling to each other," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder and fear. Dr. Morrison made the decision that would define the rest of his career. "Tom, Dr. Vasquez, if you're going in there, you go now, but I'm going with you." The three adults, with Oliver in Tom's arms, carefully maneuvered through the narrow opening into the supply closet. What they found inside broke their hearts and filled them with determination. The injured bear cub was lying on its side among scattered medical supplies, its breathing shallow and labored. It was smaller than its sibling, probably the runt of the litter, and it was clear that the fall had seriously injured its back leg. But when the cub saw Oliver, its eyes brightened slightly and it made a soft sound of recognition. "It remembers him, Doctor," Vasquez said softly. "Somehow, it remembers Oliver." From outside the closet, they could hear the mother bear's distressed calls. She knew her humans were with her injured baby, but not being able to see what was happening was causing her extreme anxiety. Dr. Morrison quickly examined the injured cub, while Dr. Vasquez monitored its vital signs. The leg is definitely broken, but I don't think there's any internal bleeding. If we can stabilize it and get it back to its mother, it should survive. But moving an injured wild animal, even a small one, was dangerous. The cub was weak and frightened, and any attempt to lift it could cause it to panic and potentially injure itself further. That's when Oliver once again proved to be the key to the situation. Tom positioned the baby where the injured cub could see him clearly. Oliver reached out his tiny hand, and incredibly, the injured cub lifted its head just enough to touch the human baby's fingers with its small paw. The contact seemed to calm the injured animal immediately. Its breathing became more regular, and it stopped struggling against its injuries. It was as if Oliver's presence gave the cub the strength to endure what needed to happen next. Working together, Dr. Morrison and Dr. Vasquez carefully lifted the injured cub, using medical supplies from the closet to create a makeshift stretcher. The little animal whimpered softly but didn't fight them, seeming to understand that they were trying to help. When they emerged from the supply closet carrying the injured cub, the mother bear's reaction was overwhelming. She rushed forward, her massive body trembling with relief and anxiety. She immediately began sniffing her injured baby, making soft rumbling sounds that were clearly meant to comfort and reassure. The reunion between the bear family was profoundly moving. The healthy cub pressed close to its injured sibling, making soft chittering sounds, while the mother bear positioned herself protectively over both her babies. Despite the clinical hospital setting and the crowd of human observers, this was a moment of pure maternal love that transcended species. But their relief was short-lived. From somewhere in the hospital came the sound of multiple vehicles arriving, doors slamming, and authoritative voices giving orders. The wildlife department and other official agencies had arrived, and they were clearly not planning to allow this unprecedented rescue to continue. "Dr. Morrison," Patricia's voice came over the radio, tight with tension. "We have multiple agency representatives in the building. They're demanding immediate access to the bears, and they're not taking no for an answer." The mother bear seemed to sense the new threat. Her ears perked up at the sound of unfamiliar voices and approaching footsteps. She moved protectively over her cubs, but there was nowhere to go. They were trapped on the third floor of a hospital, surrounded by potential threats, with one injured baby who couldn't travel far. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Dr. Morrison looked at the Bear family, then at his colleagues, then at the Mitchell family with their own precious baby. They had come so far, achieved the impossible reunion, but now they faced their greatest challenge yet. "Now," he said with quiet determination, "we find out whether doing the right thing is enough to protect this family." Outside in the corridor, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and authoritative voices could be heard giving orders about securing the animals and ending this dangerous situation. The final confrontation was approaching, and everything they had worked for hung in the balance. The mother bear looked at Dr. Morrison as if she could understand the gravity of the situation. In her dark eyes he saw intelligence, gratitude, and a desperate plea for continued protection of her vulnerable babies. Whatever happened next, he knew he couldn't abandon this family that had trusted them with their lives. The footsteps stopped just outside the supply room area, and a stern voice called out, "This is State Wildlife Control. We're coming in, and we expect full cooperation with the immediate tranquilization and removal of these animals." Dr. Morrison stepped forward, positioning himself between the bears and the approaching authorities. "Over my dead body," he said quietly, but with absolute conviction. The final battle for the bear family was about to begin. But as the state wildlife control team rounded the corner, weapons and tranquilizer guns at the ready, they stopped dead in their tracks. What they saw was unlike anything in their professional experience. Dr. Morrison stood protectively in front of the bear family, his arms spread wide. Beside him, Tom Mitchell held Oliver, who was reaching out toward the bear cubs with obvious affection. Dr. Vasquez knelt beside the injured cub, monitoring its condition while the mother bear watched her with complete trust. The healthy bear cub had positioned itself between its injured sibling and the approaching strangers, mimicking its mother's protective stance. "Stand down immediately," ordered Captain Richard Hayes, the lead wildlife officer. "These are dangerous wild animals that need to be contained." "With respect, Captain," Dr. Morrison replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances, "these are not dangerous animals. They're a family that has been separated by tragedy and reunited through compassion." Captain Hayes looked skeptical until he noticed something that made him pause. Oliver, the human baby, was making soft cooing sounds that the bear cubs were responding to with gentle chittering. The injured cub, despite its pain, was trying to lift its head toward the human baby. "What exactly happened here?" Captain Hayes asked, lowering his weapon slightly. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her veterinary credentials giving her authority to speak. "Captain, in 25 years of working with wildlife, I have never seen behavior like this. This mother bear has been protecting a human infant for hours. She risked her own safety to enter an unfamiliar environment, not to hunt or attack, but to care for vulnerable young, both her own and ours." Sarah Mitchell, who had been quietly observing, found her voice. "Captain, that bear protected my baby when I couldn't. She watched over him, kept him calm, even straightened his blankets. How can we repay that kindness by treating her like a criminal?" The wildlife team exchanged uncertain glances. This was not the scenario they had been prepared for. Captain Hayes had responded to calls about aggressive bears, property damage, and threats to human safety. He had never dealt with a situation involving interspecies protection and cooperation. "The protocol is clear," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Wild animals in human facilities must be removed immediately." "And what about animals who have demonstrated extraordinary intelligence and compassion?" Dr. Morrison challenged. "What about creatures who have proven they can coexist peacefully with humans when treated with respect?" As if understanding the importance of the moment, the mother bear did something that would be talked about for generations. She carefully moved away from her cubs and approached Captain Hayes slowly, deliberately, with no sign of aggression. When she was close enough, she sat back on her haunches and looked directly into his eyes. For a long moment, human and bear regarded each other in perfect silence. In her dark eyes, Captain Hayes saw intelligence, dignity, and an unmistakable plea for understanding. This was not the mindless aggression of a wild predator. This was a mother asking for protection for her family. "She's asking for sanctuary," Dr. Chen whispered. "She knows her injured cub can't survive in the wild right now. She's asking us to help." The injured cub made a weak sound from its makeshift stretcher, and Oliver immediately responded with soft, babbling sounds. The connection between the two babies was so obvious, so profound, that even the wildlife officers could see it. Captain Hayes holstered his tranquilizer gun. "This goes against every protocol I've ever learned," he said slowly. "But I've never seen anything like this either." He turned to Dr. Morrison. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Temporary sanctuary while the cub heals," Dr. Morrison replied. "We have a secure area in our research facility where the family can stay together safely. Dr. Chen can oversee the cub's medical care, and we can monitor their behavior. If they prove to be a danger, we relocate them. If they continue to demonstrate this remarkable, peaceful behavior, we help them find a permanent home where they can be safe and respected," Dr. Chen finished. The healthy bear cub, sensing that the tension was easing, moved closer to Oliver. Tom carefully lowered his son so the two babies could interact. When Oliver's tiny hand touched the cub's soft fur, both babies made contented sounds that filled the entire corridor with hope. "Approved," Captain Hayes said finally. "Temporary sanctuary with full documentation and monitoring. But doctor, if this situation changes, if there's any sign of aggression or danger, you'll be the first to know, doctor," Morrison promised. Miss Foster, who had been watching from a distance, stepped forward with a smile. "I'll handle the media and the legal documentation. Something tells me this story is going to inspire a lot of people." As the group began making arrangements for the bear family's temporary home, the mother bear returned to her cubs. She gently nuzzled her injured baby, then looked up at each of the humans who had helped her. In her gaze was unmistakable gratitude. Oliver, still fascinated by his new friends, reached out one more time to touch the healthy bear cub. As their hands met, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "He'll remember this," she whispered to Tom. "Somehow, he'll always remember that love and kindness can come from the most unexpected places." Dr. Morrison looked around at his colleagues, at the Mitchell family, at the wildlife officers who had chosen compassion over protocol, and at the bear family who had trusted them with their lives. "We all will," he said softly. 6 months later, Oliver Mitchell took his first steps in the observation area of the Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary, where 3 healthy bears watched him with obvious affection through reinforced glass. The injured cub, now fully healed, pressed its paw against the barrier as Oliver approached. The bear family had never been returned to the wild. Instead, they had become ambassadors for a new understanding between humans and wildlife, living in a specially designed habitat where they could interact safely with researchers and visitors who came from around the world to witness the family that had redefined what it meant to care for one another. And every evening, as the sanctuary closed to visitors, Oliver's family would come for their special visit. The mother bear would watch Oliver play, the same protective instinct that had brought them together still burning bright in her eyes. Some bonds, they learned, transcend species, circumstance, and all reasonable explanation. Some bonds are simply meant to be eternal. In the pediatric wing of Pine Valley Medical Center, a small plaque still hangs near room 204. It reads, "In memory of the night when love proved stronger than fear, and a mother's heart recognized no boundaries." But those who were there that stormy evening know the real truth. It wasn't just one mother's heart that changed everything. It was the collective choice of humans and animals alike to choose compassion over fear, understanding over aggression, and love over everything else. And in a world that often seems divided by differences, that choice made all the difference.